Calling all stamp collectors. Calling all stamp collectors. In cooperation with the National Federation of Stamp Clubs, the National Broadcasting Company takes pleasure in presenting another program for the special interest and enjoyment of those who collect stamps. And here is the National Federation of Stamp Clubs radio representative, your old friend, Captain Tim Healy.
Thank you, Douglas Browning. Good afternoon, stamp collectors everywhere. Well, a new stamp season is just starting, and from all indications, it's going to be one of the most interesting and most active for many years. The war in Europe has tended to strengthen stamp prices. The latest information we have secured from the warring countries is that business in stamps is going on just as usual, and that prices are strengthening and much more activity is anticipated. This follows along the same lines as during the World War. Men who were in London during that period tell us that immediately upon the declaration of war, there was a little demoralization which lasted for 2 or 3 months, but following that period there was feverish activity and prices soared to new highs. This was due to several reasons, the first being that people wanted to put their money into a stable commodity, like stamp, which had an international market, and secondly, with all places of amusement closed, people naturally wanted something to do in their leisure time. History seems to be repeating itself in this respect, and both in Europe as well as they expect a more active season than would otherwise have existed. Another important result that will interest collectors, this country in particular, is that the sale at auction of the famous United States stamp collection of Stephen D. Brown has been transferred from London to New York and will be held in this city on October the 30th and the 31st, and November the 1st to the 4th inclusive. Well, today we welcome back with us our old friend, Harry L. Lindquist. Believe me, as he lost some weight. As chairman of the National Federation of Stamp Clubs and publisher of stamps, well, we're always glad to have Harry with us because he always brings the latest news to pass on to all our good friends. So, Harry, you look like a perfect 36, but I guess you're a 42. Won't you tell us what the newest developments in the stamp world?
Well, the first thing I want them about, Tim, is to tip off our listeners to be on the lookout for some new experimental electric eye stamps from Washington. I have just learned on good authority that our Bureau of Engraving and Printing is experimenting with a new type of printing that will produce many new varieties on the stamps that are being issued. On the stamp to commemorate the first printing in the United States, and on the 4 states' 50th anniversary, there will be vertical dashes, horizontal slugs, and at least twice in each pane of 400 stamps, 2 vertical slugs, which will guide the electric eye while the sheets are being perforated. It is hoped that this will result in better perforations on our stamps, so that the experiments will be watched with considerable interest. These new experimental stamps are apt to come out on very short notice, and we will endeavor to keep our listeners informed so that they will not overlook the opportunity to secure first-day covers of them when they are ready. There will also be first days on the 1 cent, 2 cent, and 3 cent booklet panes, and the 1/2 cent, 1 cent, and 1.5 cent presidential issue with the new type of electric eye. Recently, the National Federation of Stamp Clubs received a resolution from one of its members requesting that we use our influence so that the philatelic agency in Washington would eliminate all straight edges when filling orders. One of the members of the club in question had received some straight edges, so we wrote to Arthur L. Rogers, the philatelic agent, about it. Mr. Rogers tells us that it is not the policy of the philatelic agency to send out any stamps with straight edges, except when they are on full sheets. Eliminated from the full sheets if the request is made at the time the order is placed. But even if the collector overlooks making this request and later decides to change the straight edges, he may do so within a reasonable time and get new stamps in place of them or a refund of his money. The agency is extremely anxious to please collectors, and this indication of their cooperation will be appreciated by everyone. But I don't want to take up any more time with these announcements, for we have here in the studio an outstanding philatelist, one who has already made a reputation for himself as a student of the stamps of Mexico. I refer to Paul F. Berdainier, the art director of J. Walter Thompson Advertising Company, who has made a good use of the stamps in his profession, and I'm going to ask him to tell you something about it. So, Paul, how about telling our listeners how you started to collect stamps and how you make use of them in your work? Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Berdainier.
Well, Harry, my start as a stamp collector was a little different from the ordinary one. Some time ago, I was commissioned to design a label for a product we advertise. It was requested that the label be definitely English in execution. Well, I studied over the problem for some time. I made sketches by the dozen, but somehow I couldn't produce anything that really interested me. There was an idea floating around in my head that stamps ought to help me. It seems as if the stamps of any given country were usually reflected the spirit of that country, and of course contained many symbols that would be authentic and valuable. So a stamp store and bought a whole lot of English stamps. I studied them for a while and then went to work. Well, believe it or not, the label I finally designed looked so British you could almost hear the English accent. Our client was extremely pleased with the results. After that, I began collecting stamps of various other countries, so as to have them on hand when I needed them. I know definitely that stamps have helped me a great deal in my designing work. You see, many of the finest artists and craftsmen in the world have been engaged to design stamps, and each one approaches the problem from his own nationalistic angle. So a collection formed along this line can be a tremendous source of ideas.
That idea of yours, Paul, of making use of your stamps as a source of ideas and inspirations appeals to me very much, and I think few people have made as good use of it as you have. Coming back to stamps themselves, however, I would like to get your idea on the products of our own post office department.
I'll tell you, Harry, I've heard and read criticisms of the work of our own Bureau of Engraving and Printing. But I think that taken as a whole, our United States stamps will compare favorably with any stamps produced in the entire world.
Well, I know that you have a very definite theory in regard to the designing of stamps, particularly the United States stamps. So won't you tell us about it?
Well, it's this. I'm just American enough to want the stamps of our own country to be the best in the world, and I think they can be. In the first place, there just aren't craftsmen anywhere than there are in our own Bureau of Engraving and Printing. But here's the rub. The best master craftsman isn't always the best designer, and I think that is what our post office department needs. During the early history of the United States, the people were so proud of their new country that they couldn't resist the temptation to display anything representing the United States in their homes, their dress, and their manners. As a result, a new decoration was born, the Federal period, and as the nation grew more mature, new expressions of patriotism insisted themselves into our designs. Certainly all this can be used symbolically as designs for stamps. But a design is not just a picture. A design is the careful positioning and proportioning of all the necessary elements to make a pleasing whole. This is what a good designer can do well. I believe that we should select the very best designers that we have and divide among them the commissions to produce designs for our stamps. As a matter of fact, this procedure was followed recently by Great Britain in producing the higher values of the King George VI series. Their regular designers had produced a very attractive stamp used for the lower values. However, these exhausted the striking primary colors, so it was felt that an entirely new design should be used for the higher values. In that way, the same colors could be used again and still not confuse the post office clerks as to the denomination. As a result, Edmund Dulac, a very famous English designer, was commissioned to produce a new design. His creation was beautiful, and now it is being used on all the higher values of the present King George VI set. I first saw the reproduction of the design in a newspaper and was so pleased with it that I immediately wrote Mr. Dulac, congratulating him on his superb design. I also expressed the hope that it would lead to other commissions being given to well-known artists. Mr. Dulac responded very courteously, sending me samples of the stamps. He pointed out that the commission he had fulfilled wasn't as easy as it looked. With it certain specifications, such as the fact that the stamp must contain the king's head, the crown, and the words postage revenue and the denomination. These limitations make the work extremely difficult, of course, but I am sure that no one who has seen these recent stamps will fail to agree Mr. Dulac executed his commission well. Don't you think so, Harry?
I certainly do, Paul. Let's hope that our own Bureau of Engraving and Printing will follow this precedent and secure the cooperation of some of our outstanding designers.
We certainly have a large number qualified to do the job.
Well, that's all very interesting, Paul, and I echo your hope that the officials in charge of our postage stamps will follow your suggestion and place the artistic merits of our stamps on a new high plane. I see you have with you W.A. Dwiggen's book entitled Toward a Reform of the Paper Currency, particularly in point of its design. I was quite amused at some of the illustrations you showed me, particularly that one of a group of infuriated artists demolishing the Bureau of Engraving and Printing in Washington on the morning of the 5th of July, 1951. The edition is so limited that I am sure few of our listeners know about this book, so won't you point out some of the interesting paragraphs?
This book was published in 1932, so some of the suggestions made have already been carried out. But Mr. Dwiggins felt that our stamps could be vastly improved. I think personally that he is a little too severe on the bureau designers. But the following single quotation, at least that our officials ought to give the matter serious consideration. He says this, and I quote, "Even if we are not aware that such things as postage stamps show whether a government clicks or not, it is time that we became aware. We may not, as a general public, know anything about style in engraved official paper, but it's high time for us to insist that somebody in the federal service should know. We pay a good price to equip and maintain a government institution that ought to be a radiation point for the best there is in graphic design, a laboratory of engraving and printing with all the resources of the nation behind it." End of quote. I certainly think Mr. Dwiggins put his finger on it. Our stamps are pictorial propaganda and can either give the rest of the world the idea that we have no taste or that we are a nation of good taste. I endorse his idea that the government should radiate fine graphic designing. We're proud of America, and one of the ways to show it is to say it with stamps.
Well, I fully agree with you, Paul. But I introduced you as a specialist in the stamps of Mexico. And I've heard rumors that the Mexican Post Office Department is planning to sell all their obsolete stamps. Do you know anything about this?
Well, really, all I know about it is what I hear from the Association of Philatelic Mexicans. You know, they're an up-and-coming club located in Puebla. They tell me that some time ago, a dealer got the Mexican government to auction off 180,000 pesos worth of stamps. Somehow, he was the only bidder and got the stamps for 18,000 pesos, just one-tenth their face value. This deal was apparently quite profitable, as I understand he now has offered to buy all the remaining obsolete stamps at a peso and a half per thousand, regardless of face value. This would certainly be buying them cheap, as they tell me that this lot numbers about 23 million stamps with a face value around 6 million pesos. I've figured this out and find that if the government accepted this offer, he would pay about 35 pesos for all the stamps. This is about 1/18 of their face value. The bulletin from the association further reports that they communicated with President Cardenas. Apparently, the president was impressed, as the very latest information I have from the association is that the Treasury Department has rejected the offer to buy all the obsolete stamps of the Mexican government. I think that those of us who collect stamps, particularly from Mexico, can be very thankful that this energetic association exists. It certainly looks as if they are proving to be faithful friends of all philatelists.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Berdainier. You have presented a splendid argument, and I hope that our audience generally can get behind a movement such as you suggest and help to raise the standards of our American stamps as well as the stamps throughout the world generally. I was also extremely interested in the constructive way in which you have made use of stamps in your profession. There seems to be no limit to the motives which prompt different people to collect stamps, and I'm sure there must be many listeners to this program today who will profit by your experience. We're very happy to have you with us, sir, and we sincerely hope and trust that very soon you'll join us again and bring us some of your very interesting matter. We'd like to hear more about those stamps you've talked about of Mexico. Now, don't forget that next Saturday we'll have another program at the same time. And be sure to keep your eye out for that electric eye that our good friend Harry Lindquist just told you about. And so until next Saturday, the same, well, we wish you the best of luck and a very delightful time with your stamps. And now here is my good friend, Douglas Browning.
Thank you, Captain Tim. Friends, this afternoon you heard Captain Tim Healy, radio representative of the National Federation of Stamp Clubs, Harry L. Lindquist, chairman of the National Federation of Stamp Clubs, and Mr. Paul F. Berdainier, Jr., art director of J. Walter Thompson Company. This is the National Broadcasting Company, RCA Building, Radio City, New York.